Well, friends, we're in the thick of it now. Seeds everywhere, young plants everywhere, lots to do, but also lots to look forward to. With the temperatures finally warming up, gardening everywhere has reached a fever pitch. You'll no doubt have noticed pallets and pallets of soil at the hardware stores, racks and racks of seeds at the generic department stores, and trays of starter seedlings at the grocery stores. Everywhere we turn, we're inundated with gardening products, more at this time of year than any other. And what that does is create a lot of noise around us. So now more than ever, Garden Quickies become more poignant and more on point. In case you missed it, here's episodes 131 to 140. Enjoy. It's so nice to finally see the sun shining again. And if you're lucky, where you live, the snow is receding, even if just slightly. Spring is on the way, and if you know any gardeners, quite likely you'll have noticed them starting a few crops early indoors. As a beginner or even a first-time grower, maybe you've thought to yourself, hey, I'd like to try that. And why not? It could be a really good confidence boost, and at the very least, it'll help you get your feet wet and your hands dirty before the gardening season really gets going. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we don't like getting our feet wet, but getting our hands dirty is guaranteed. And today's episode is all about starting seeds early. More specifically, which ones do we dabble with first? Now, I've got dozens of seed starting videos that I've already done, and I'll link to them in the description below. But for today, let's go ahead and get those feet wet and look at the 5 easiest crops to start early indoors. Hey, time's short as it always is, so let's dive in. For various reasons, not all crops should be started early indoors. Peas are normally one of those crops. These guys like the cool temperatures of spring, sometimes don't transplant very well, and just generally start easier from direct seeding. But they do germinate super easy, and to get going, a new batch of peas sprouting sure builds that confidence. To get started, sow them about ½ an inch deep into some moist seeding soil, and at around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they'll sprout in about a week. Our second crop is a big guy that most people prefer to direct seed, but I actually always start these guys early indoors, and that's zucchinis. Plant the biggie size seeds flat, about ½ inch deep, and give them lots of space and even more light. Zucchinis and squashes can be monster plants quickly, almost right out of the gate. So don't start them too early unless you've got a ton of space. At number 3, we've got another quick grower, and that's cucumbers. Again, not one that's suggested to be started early, often because of poor transplanting. But for me, I've got a short summer, and my cukes really appreciate the extra growing time. To give your cucumbers a head start, why not plant them in some biodegradable pots? That way, you can get around any transplanting issues. Our last 2 crops are the big daddies of starter plants, and the first of those are peppers. As the second most popular starter plant out there, peppers are almost never direct seeded outdoors. They come in a million different varieties, and they sprout super easy under warm conditions. Drop the heat, up the light, and increase that airflow once they get going, because you're going to want these guys healthy and bushy right away. And finally, we've got the world's #1 starter plant, and for good reason, tomatoes. Even if they're not your personal favorite, there's no mistaking that tomatoes are the #1 plant to buy or start yourself. These guys absolutely love to be repotted, so don't worry about starting them too early. Really, your only problem with tomatoes is going to be figuring out which awesome variety to try next. And while you're doing that, make sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Winter is finally losing its icy grip, a sure sign that gardeners everywhere are starting to feel that annual planting itch. Some of the lucky few have started seeds early indoors, especially for those long summer crops like tomatoes and peppers, while others have all their seeds ready, willing, and able to go. Just say the word. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're not only willing, but we're also mostly able. And today's episode is all about spring planting. More accurately, how do we know when it's finally time to plant? There's so many conflicting suggestions out there. And I get it, that can be super confusing. So today, I've singled out 3 ways that you can tell it's finally time to plant this spring, each one easier than the next. Speaking of time, it's short as you know it is, so let's dive in. No 2 crops are the same. Every plant that we grow in our backyard is unique and different, obviously. But what I mean by that is, every one of these guys that we grow has a different timeline from seed to harvest. Fortunately, for all the known crops of the world, this timeline has already been figured out for us. So, take your known month of when you want to harvest a particular crop, count backwards the length of the crop timeline, and that's when you should be planting. Easy peasy. The second way to know when it's time to plant is by frost date. Specifically, the last spring frost date for your zone or climate. Now, for those that don't know or maybe never heard of it, the last spring frost date is the specific calendar day for your area when there is a less than 50% chance of frost occurring that night. When those nighttime low temperatures are finally above freezing, we're usually 2 weeks away from planting out in the garden, give or take. Inherently, that does have some gray area, and I find it kind of arbitrary. So, a better method, and our final way to tell that it's finally time to plant out in the garden, is temperature. By that, I mean specifically the nighttime lows. When the lowest temperature at night for your area stays above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or 10 degrees Celsius, your cool season crops like carrots, radishes, beets, peas, lettuce, and spinach can all be planted. For your warm weather crops like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and all the melons, you'll want to wait until the nighttime lows stay above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or 15 degrees Celsius, just to be safe. Great gardening has always been about timing, and planting your plants or sowing your seeds when that time is right is your best chance at success. Well, that, but also watching the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Garden beds. Without a doubt, they make growing food on a backyard scale so much easier and so much more enjoyable. Yes, they can be a bit of work to build, transport, and fill up with soil, but once they're all set up, you're good to go for years. But that begs the question, just how long do they last for? Well, not as long as we'd like them to, but far longer than you think. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we last as long as it takes. More specifically, how long can we reasonably expect our garden beds to last for? Time's ticking both for the beds and us as well. So let's dive in. True garden bed longevity is a complex equation made up of many factors. Things such as wood type, thickness, your climate, treatments, and of course drainage. Placing thin boards of spruce or even some pines directly onto wet, soggy dirt is a recipe for a short-lived garden bed. Over the years, I've seen as well as participated in some of the most terrible garden bed choices, and even still, I say you get 4 to 5 years, worst case scenario. Stepping up to a better quality of wood, such as fir or cedar, as well as adding some thickness up to say the size of dimensional lumber, and you're looking at 7 to 8 years easily. Even better than that, going to optimal conditions where the bed is placed on well-draining gravel or sand and kept clear of weeds, grass, and debris, well, now we're talking 10 years plus. Hey, even sometimes, and I've seen it, 15 or 20 years. All of my garden beds here on the farm are 12 years old or older. Yeah, sections have broken off here and there due to direct damage or even some storms, but none have ever truly rotted away. That is, not until this one here, and I think I know why. Dimensional lumber, particularly the stuff in my area, is sold as SPF, or spruce pine fir. This means that when you go to buy the materials to build a brand new garden bed, it can be any one of those 3 types of wood. Fir is best, spruce is the worst. Despite looking virtually identical, this spruce is only half the weight of this fir. I suspect that 13 years ago, young naive me couldn't tell or didn't know the difference between the types of wood. And the boards that made up this short side, well, they're probably spruce. So, a repair job for me, but hopefully for you subscribing and checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. From the comfy confines of the inside world to the rigorous perils of the great outdoors. Such is a seedling's life. It's not really that dramatic. Or is it? Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're dramatically rigorous. But only when it comes to plants, especially our young ones. So today's video is all about hardening them off. More specifically, what happens when we don't do it? Time short as it always is, so let's dive in. For clarity, hardening off is simply the process of gradual exposure to outside environmental pressures for young indoor plants so that they can adjust and acclimatize to the life outside. Now, it's really just 3 main pressures that bombard our young plants that we're concerned with: temperature fluctuations, increased light intensity, and air circulation. Let's look at all 3 and find out what happens to our young plants when they're not properly acclimated or hardened off. First up is temperature, and it's a big one. Plants are tough, no doubt, and they can take serious fluctuations all over the mercury range, but only if they're used to it. Going from a warm, stable life indoors to a cold or even frosty one outside can have lethal effects. In just 36 hours outside, this tomato plant completely bit the dust. Ouch. Light is another doozy, although it rarely kills the whole plant entirely. Soft young leaves will wilt and get sunspots or even sunburned, but the plant usually recovers. And the new leaves coming up are conditioned for the full direct sunlight, so the plant looks no worse for the wear in just a couple of weeks. Still, this kind of damage is unsightly and it can set a plant back. So, harden them off first. Lastly, we have a huge increase in air circulation, and this one's kind of in between. Yes, it can be fatal, but only in extreme circumstances. Still, your lush young leaves are going to be susceptible to wilt, leaf curl, windburn, and even total damage. On top of that, weak stems can bend and break, often spelling the end of the plants themselves. Worst case scenario, but it does happen. In the end, each pressure is immediate and relentless from the moment you take your seedlings outside. Hardening off is not optional. Know what else is not optional? Checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Last fall, we planned ahead in a big way with some daffodils, crocuses, and a whole mess of tulips. I'm so glad we did because winter is barely behind us and already we're popping with some serious color. Collectively, these and many others are known as spring bulbs. Yes, they're planted way back in the fall, but they come alive and bloom in the spring, which for me is right now. We get to enjoy these fabulous blooms now only because we had the forethought to put these bulbs into the ground right before last winter. So, while these guys come of age, let's continue that diligent planning and plant our summer bulbs. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, diligent planning is our middle name. And today's episode is all about these summer bulbs. Specifically, my top 4 choices of summer bulbs to plant this spring. Time short as it always is, so let's dive in. Summer bulbs are different than their spring counterparts in that they don't need, nor do they want, a winter chilling period. So, instead of planted in the fall for a spring bloom, summer bulbs are actually planted in the spring and then come alive that summer, as their name implies. And this leads us to the first of our top 4 choices, which are the lilies. Now, these guys come in as many types and varieties as they do sizes and colors. Most lilies are very long-lived and do best in cooler climates, which is kind of nice because, as we'll find out, a lot of the summer bulbs are quite tropical in nature. Our second choice are the gladioluses. These guys are a member of the iris family, so you know they're tough. Gladiolus range in size from 2 to 5 feet, so finding the right one for the right spot in your garden should be a cinch. Also, like some of our lilies, gladiolus can be left in the ground to regrow if you're in zone 7 or higher. Below that though, if you want to regrow those bulbs the following year, you're going to have to dig them up and store them before winter. At number 3, we've got begonias. Now, these guys are a bit more tropical, so if you live in a cooler climate like mine, well, their growing seasons can be short, but they've got one positive going for them. They absolutely love the shade. Some growers go as far as saying that begonias actually prefer the shade, giving these guys the distinct advantage of going where some other bulbs simply can't go. And finally, last but not least, we have the big daddy of summer bulbs, dahlias. The most impressive, outstanding blooms, but only in the right conditions. You'll find that dahlias are kinda picky like that. So, give them a nice, loose, well-drained, rich soil that's slightly acidic. Absolutely great for container setups. Just make sure that your soil is at least a foot deep, even for the smaller types. Summer bulbs. The yin to the spring bulb's yang. A small amount of effort for what amounts to a huge amount of enjoyment all summer long. Know what else will give you a huge amount of enjoyment? Checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Whether your established mother plants are just emerging from a long winter slumber, or you've been eyeing up the relatively inexpensive and numerous baby plants at the store, there's no doubt strawberry season is almost upon us. And even though I've got strawberries growing nearly everywhere, it's still not enough, and I'll be planting a ton more this year, provided I've got the space. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, strawberries are our jam. And today's episode is all about spacing. How much room do these guys need to grow and perform their best? Time short as it always is, so let's dive in. Strawberries are a cool climate, low-crawling plant that expand their operations in 2 ways. Both by crown divisions and by these amazing stoloniferous appendages known as runners. But because strawberries expand and multiply all on their own, their biggest competitor for water and nutrients is often themselves. As such, proper spacing with these guys takes on even more importance. The rule of thumb for most strawberry varieties is 12 inches apart in all directions. Their fine fibrous roots don't really go down very far, but they do spread outwards. So, taking a standard 8 foot by 2 foot raised bed using a zigzag planting pattern, you should be able to get at least 12 strawberry plants in. For larger gardens, even commercial setups, strawberries are still grown 12 inches apart, but they're grown in east to west rows about 3 feet apart from each other. And if you're growing container style, you really open up a whole world of options. As long as it's at least 6 inches deep, go by the square area rather than the volume. Remember, even pots that hold the identical amount of soil can be radically different in shape and size. One last thing, people tend to go with tighter spacing when they're doing container setups, and that can work. But be prepared to divide and repot your strawberry mother plants far more often. As we know from previous videos, strawberry mother plants are usually dug up, divided, and replanted every 4 to 5 years. In a small container setup, that happens much more often. A good rule of thumb is 1 strawberry plant per 2 gallons of pot size, provided the container isn't overly tall. And provided you check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. In my opinion, no other berry crop is as prolific or reliable as a mature strawberry plant. Fruit after fruit giving relentless production all summer long. And as winter recedes, these guys are just starting to explode back to life for a new season of awesomeness. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we try to make every season awesome. And today's episode is all about feeding your strawberries. More specifically, when to feed them. Spring has sprung, and that means time is short. So let's dive in. Strawberries are the ultimate low-maintenance crop. Pest-resistant, self-pruning, they regularly outcompete and outgrow weeds, and they're only fed twice a year. Which brings us to why we're here today. As we pick the last delicious berry in the waning days of summer, or even the early fall, we built back up our strawberry beds with either compost or other slow-release amendments. This revitalized the spent mother plants and set them up for a satisfying and necessary winter dormancy. For a lot of commercial strawberry growers, this is all they do for their patch. They amend or fertilize but once a year. For the home grower, who's often growing in smaller containers and tends to repot them more, we fertilize our strawberries at one more key time of the year, which coincidentally is right now. As soon as your strawberry plants emerge from winter dormancy and break that leaf bud, but before they start to flower, is a perfect time to feed them. It's now or never, because you don't want to be feeding your strawberries leading up to or during the fruiting stage. It'll affect not only the level of harvest, but also the taste. For now though, with flowering and fruiting at least a month or more away, we're good to feed. Use a dilute organic balanced blend, skewing slightly higher in potassium. In the end, it's a small amount of work for a biggie-sized return on investment. Much like watching the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Planted so long ago you can't even remember, your garlic has endured the long cold winter, only to spring up tall and proud, ready to tackle the final stretch until harvest. But shouldn't they be getting a little bit hungry by now? Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we feed your plants and your mind. And today's episode is all about feeding your garlic. More specifically, when to feed and what to feed with. Time's short as you know it is, so let's dive in. Since our garlic was planted way back in the fall, right before winter dormancy, in a rich compost-filled bed, it hasn't been fed or even watered in nearly 7 months. Yet, it still looks pretty good, doesn't it? Even this container stuff. But with garlic, as with life, looks can only get you so far. In the end, we're after actual bulb production. So in these final 3 to 4 months, what we do is key. Which of course brings us to food. For as long as garlic grows, amazingly, it's only fed twice in its entire life. And both of those times are in the spring, in the lead up to bulb formation and harvest. The most important feeding is the one we do right now. Around your last spring frost date or shortly after, if your garlic is at least 6 inches tall, you can feed. A good thorough soaking with a liquid organic fertilizer is best, as this is the most important feeding time. This garlic looks great, no doubt, but it's still got a long way to go. And that gives us time for one more feeding. Really? Garlic isn't harvested until midsummer, at the earliest, so we can squeeze in one more feeding as long as it's not too close to that harvest. You never want to be feeding your garlic too close to pulling up those bulbs, as they can become mushy and unusable. So, around 6 to 8 weeks before you intend to harvest, about a month after the first feeding, one last blast of fertilizer is given to set the garlic up for success. And by now, I'm assuming you're wondering what we should even be feeding our garlic with, what with all the choices we have out there? Well, with garlic, it all boils down to balance. Every fertilizer you buy has 3 numbers on the front label, indicating its relative concentrations of the 3 main macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. My best garlic has always come from using a balance of these 3 macronutrients, but if one had to skew higher, make it nitrogen. Remember, with garlic bulbs, you're basically harvesting modified leaves. So, aim for a balanced blend and dilute to the manufacturer's specifications. Fed twice, both times in the spring. Hey, garlic may be a long crop, but it's also an easy one. Know what else is easy? Checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. If your strawberry plants aren't bursting through the mulch after that long, hard winter, they soon will be. And if you're just joining the Strawberry Jamboree by purchasing your first starter plants, well, hello to you too. Fairly soon, there's gonna be strawberries everywhere. But only if we feed them right. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're strawberry obsessed. And today's episode is all about what to feed our strawberry plants. Big or small, what do we need to give these guys to get the most out of them? Time short as it always is, so let's dive in. As mentioned in previous videos, strawberries are an ultra low maintenance crop that's only fed max twice a year. Once after the last berry has been picked in the late summer, early fall, and then again right now in the early spring, but well before flowers or any fruits. I've seen it too many times to count, but feeding strawberries too close to fruiting can affect the berry size, the numbers, the taste, everything. So really, it's best to avoid it. Great, but what do we feed with? Because all those choices out there are ridiculously staggering. Well, for strawberries, as is the case with a lot of crops out there, it's all about balance. Right away, that points to your NPK, or your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratio. You'll find this on the front label of every commercial and retail fertilizer out there, represented as 3 numbers. For strawberries, it really should be balanced, meaning all 3 numbers are roughly the same. Now, the majority of fertilizers out there skew higher in the first number, which is nitrogen, and this is the most important macronutrient, no doubt. But high nitrogen is not what we want to be fertilizing our strawberries with, especially for the second feeding. In fact, if any of the numbers is to skew higher, make it the last one, potassium. This plant macro is directly responsible for fruit growth, development, and size. No question nitrogen is going to get you big, healthy foliage. And for some crops, that's great. But I can't remember the last time I've chowed down on a bunch of strawberry leaves. Indeed. Hey, one last thing before we go here. Try to also get in some trace minerals, compounds, and elements into your soil. Things like boron, chloride, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, and zinc. These and other micronutrients are super important for the strawberry plant's higher functions. But I firmly believe they also refine and make our strawberries pop with extra flavor. Know what else pops with extra flavor? The next episode of the Garden Quickie. A hardy annual plant with biennial shoots. We're talking raspberries, and yours are likely just waking up from a long winter's dormancy. Floricanes busting out their new buds and leaves, while the primicanes are on their way up as the weather warms. With a unique taste like no other berry, raspberry growers eagerly await the summer's bounty with these guys, hoping that all they've done is enough. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we do more than enough. And today's episode is all about feeding your raspberries. What to feed them and when to feed them. Time short as it always is, so let's dive in. As a cool weather crop, raspberries spend much of their life suspended in a long winter slumber. Because of this short window of actual growing time, we only feed our raspberries once a year. Make no mistake, your patch can just be amended with some rich compost, mulched heavily with layers of organics, and that can easily be enough to sustain the plants. But if you really want to fertilize, that happens only once, and the time to do it is right now. The best time to feed your raspberries is just as they've started to break bud in the early spring. Like strawberries, you'll want to avoid any feeding that's close to fruiting, but to take it a step further, all raspberry fertilization should cease by June. That's great, but what should we be feeding with? Well, for raspberries, the best fertilizers are the ones with a balanced NPK. By that I mean, the 3 numbers on the label of any fertilizer you buy should be the same or very, very close. Now, if you have good soil and you regularly amend with rich compost, your fertilizer can skew higher in potassium. That would be the last number, or K. In certain circumstances, this can get you mega harvests. But it's always better to play it safe and use a balanced blend. In the end, feed only once in the early spring and use a balanced fertilizer to support foliar but also fruiting growth. And hey, don't feed past June, but do make sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if Garden Quickies are your thing, be sure to click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.